This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
So, Tom, have you signed up yet?
For what?
The CEO Sleepout, of course.
Well, I'm not a CEO. I'm not qualified.
Do you not care about homelessness?
No, I don't.
You want to raise awareness? Homelessness? Many people don't know about this.
I've never really thought about it. Like, would it be bad to be homeless? I guess unless you've actually done it yourself and you've gone out there and you slept on the streets. I guess you just never really know.
Yeah. And it's very easy to replicate that exact experience. And you can even get little bonus trinkets if you like to help your journey along if you do take part in the annual Vinnie's CEO Sleepout Australia, which, yes, as you pointed out, isn't just, I don't know if it started as only CEOs, if you were meant to be, had to be a CEO to be eligible, but now it's like a lot of politicians and just business guys, I guess.
And Joe Hildebrand.
The
best one was Luke Gosling. You pointed this out to me, I think, or maybe
Mike
put this in the show doc. Luke Gosling, who's a Labor MP from the Northern Territory, said, June 20 will be my fourth CEO Sleepout. It's on the same day as World Refugee Day, actually, which is a little bit annoying. But bad scheduling there too.
Bad scheduling, yeah.
It'll be my fourth CEO Sleepout, raising money for Territorians doing it rough. Here's me starting the Sleepout in Canberra in 2022.
I was like, I had to, first of all, because I'd never heard of this politician, I had to check that it was a real MP and that this wasn't satire because he's sleeping in an airport in the Qantas. Like, it doesn't appear to be the actual Qantas lounge, but it's the Qantas gate or whatever. There's like Qantas signs.
Yes.
And he's like cheerfully lying on the carpet with his head propped up on his little bag as he waits for his flight. And that's him starting the sleep out in Canberra.
Yeah, presumably he's about to get on a flight and keep sleeping, and I guess.
Yeah, can you do the sleep out on an overnight flight? Because that would actually, does that count?
The homeless red eye. Oh, God. Yeah, starting the sleep out. So presumably he's going somewhere else and keeping it going. I mean, look, people might have seen, leftists, poverty activists, people we respect who are working on this shit every day, every year when this comes around, posting about how kind of cooked it is. And maybe the normie take is, hey, what's the problem? It's, people raising money. They have raised millions of dollars for Vinnies over the years to support people who are sleeping it rough. But this concept that it gives you an insight into the real lived experience of homeless people, the absence of people who are experiencing or have experienced homelessness, throughout the campaign, it's pretty deeply insulting, hey?
Yeah, I mean, my concern as well is it's another one of those ones, I guess, they're raising money, but then sometimes they refer to it as raising awareness about homelessness. And I'm like, we're aware.
And then back in 2017, I remember this one sort of gets a run every year too. The CEO Sleepout is run by St. Vincent de Paul's, was using virtual reality technology to simulate homelessness.
Incredible.
Prompting disagreement in the local business community about the best way to engage with social issues.
Is it like a video game where, and you get the backstory at first and it's like you kind of, you're made redundant, or then you have some familial and, social relationships break down and you find yourself in a situation where maybe then you get a rent hike that you can't afford. And is that all part of that? We've got like the NPCs and the NPC landlord is like, I'm going to have to raise your rent.
Wow, my VR headset shows me a local Greens councillor who's stopping development in my local area. There's no affordable housing. Quick, punch him.
This year's event looked
to take the simulation one step further, with the Sydney event providing chief executives with virtual reality headsets to get a glimpse of the realities faced by the people who experience this every day. Oy, oy, oy. And it's particularly galling when you've got, politicians partaking in the sleep out. It's like you're in the government.
If only you could do something about it. If only there was a way. Thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers and a little nap in the Qantas lounge.
Sadly, we're seeing with Labor leaders and indeed the Greens here in Australia that it's all about division, it's all about fear. It's about stoking fear.
We're stuck with the hosts of Chapo Shithouse podcast.
Serious danger to Australia.
Hey everyone, it's Serious Danger, podcast about green politics in Australia. Tom Ballard here, coming to you from Wurundjeri and Bunurong country, and being a little bit sick. Apologies for that.
Yes, don't pay attention to how sick Tom's voice sounds. He's soldiering through. I'm Emerald, coming to you as usual from Manjin on the Yagara and Turrbal country. Quick reminder, this is not an official Greens Party podcast. It is made possible with the help of the Green Institute and produced by Michael the Griffin. This week, a couple of big stories. We are looking at the possibilities of a nuclear Australia and seeing how well Tom has worked on his pronunciation of the word nuclear. And
it doesn't matter. It's not going to happen, all right? So I can say nuclear, I can say nuclear. I don't give a shit, all right?
It's true. Matter. Yeah, we're fucked either way. And we're looking at the politics of the vandalism of a Labor MP's electorate office, and, you know, vandalism in general. Is it violence? Should it be condemned, etc.? Quick thank you to our new patrons as well. We've got Erin, Darcy, Elle, Art, John, Matthew, Rosemary. I wonder if all of you are enjoying learning about how comedy is in crisis. We put out, that's our latest Patreon episode. Tom and I watched the Sky News documentary Comedy in Crisis, how cancel culture is killing laughter, killing humour. Humour is dead due to woke. That was a fun episode. It was an incredible documentary. Lots of Ricky Gervais. If you want to hear about Ricky Gervais, it's the episode for you. There's a whole other back catalogue of very fun stuff on the Patreon if you're not a subscriber already, and you know you're thinking of doing a nice deed. You got $3 spare a month that you can throw our way. That helps pay Mike's wages so we can keep doing the show, and we love you for it.
Please do it. If you're already doing that or you're not in a position to chip in financially, please consider giving some 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. That really helps spread the word and gets more people listening to the podcast. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, give us a thumbs up. Press the notification bell button. Get those love hearts going. And let's go viral, Serious Danger style. Thank you.
Kel. We keep going back to this one, nuclear, but we get 100 different versions of it. It's not going away. It keeps getting worse. It's popped up a fair bit on my Instagram. You and I know how to pronounce it, but let's be very clear. How should everyone get it right?
Okay, nuclear is the only correct pronunciation. There is no other pronunciation. As I think I mentioned to you before, Peter, sadly, the big Merriam-Webster dictionary in America offers nuclear as a second pronunciation because 3 American presidents, Eisenhower, Clinton and George W. Bush, all said it. Look, and now most Australian politicians, I think I'm hearing most of them saying it. No idea why. I wondered whether it's because some people have a problem with a double consonant, the LK sound, followed by a double vowel. I don't know. It's not hard. How do they not get it right? I just don't understand.
Maybe what I have is nuclear poisoning. Already
anticipatory nuclear poisoning. Yes.
nuclear, however you say it. It's coming, baby. Australia's going nuclear. That is the nuclear. That's a new one.
Wow, that's not future. Even close. It doesn't matter how I say it. Nuclear.
Who gives a shit? Last week. God, I am sick.
Okay. Oh God. Okay, let's get through this stuff.
Last week, we discussed the fact that the coalition has said it's going to abandon Australia's 2030 emissions reductions target. If it gets elected, they're not going to tell you what the new things are until they actually get elected. It's all wonderful stuff. They don't give a shit about climate change or the climate crisis. And they're focused on addressing that apparently through going nuclear. And this week we got their policy on how that's going to look, I guess, technically. Firstly, though, let's discuss this. This was doing the rounds. Andrew Lee posted to his Instagram an image of Blinky Bill, the koala with 3 eyes, asking, cute. Is this what Peter Dutton wants Blinky to look like in 50 years?
And is Blinky in front of a nuclear power station from The Simpsons, or is that just a random cartoon of...
No, yes, that is Springfield's nuclear power plant where Homer works. Also, the 3-eyed fish, which is very commonly cited in the nuclear conversation, is also called Blinky.
Oh,
yes.
Didn't know. Well, that's confused. I'm confused. It's funny because I didn't actually see this one doing the rounds. I saw the one. Was it posted by the council unions? Who posted it? That was like the monstrous creature thing that's probably from a movie that I haven't seen, and they're like, this is what Dutton wants the family dog to be in 2035. You didn't see that one?
I didn't see that one. No, there's
That's
one
so
with Snow
interesting.
White where they put Peter Dutton's head on Snow White's body looking down at 7 nuclear reactors.
Oh, okay, because there's 7. That's
Yes,
wow.
7, so I guess
Okay,
that kind
some
of
real-
worked. Jacinta
Thinking
Allen
outside
posted
the
one
box.
with
These
a bunch
social
of-
media content creators. That's what I like to see. It's good.
Well, apparently this is like coordinated. Again, I read there's a whole Guardian article about this, about all the Simpsons memes specifically that Labor is using and citing in response to these nuclear plans.
Okay.
And they're very annoyed about the Blinky one, apparently. Several coalition figures hit out at Andrew Lee's Blinky Bill meme. Cash put out an entire press release on Lee's post, calling it a disgraceful example of misinformation and a
Oh my
juvenile
God.
undergraduate attempted humour. Dutton raised it on ABC, blasting it as juvenile conduct, which frankly should be condemned, including by the ABC. I was like, fuck
Why
off, cunts.
don't
Have you
give
looked at
them
your own
a whole
election
story
material?
about their fucking stupid meme? So
You
dumb.
had Anthony Albanese as fucking Gollum, didn't you? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Anyway, here's what we know, at least according to the coalition, when it came to them announcing this particular policy. This is from SBS.
Mm.
Opposition leader Peter Dutton has unveiled 7 proposed nuclear power sites as part of what he says is a cheaper alternative energy policy. Liberal and National members met on Wednesday morning after the details of the energy policy were signed off by the shadow cabinet overnight. I want to make sure that the Australian public understand today that we have a vision for our country to deliver cleaner electricity and consistent electricity, Dutton told reporters. He said that 7 nuclear reactors would be built on the sites of retired coal-fired power stations. We've got 2 in Queensland, 2 in New South Wales, 1 in Victoria, 1 in WA, and 1 in South Australia. Again, these are all proposed, all with the big caveat that none of this is going to happen. They're all in coalition-held seats, except the Liddell Power Station, which is in Hunter, which is held by Labor on a very slim margin there. The first reactor would be ready by 2035. Under the plan, that's 5 years faster than the CSIRO says nuclear could be built in Australia and apparently would be owned
Take your
by the
time.
Commonwealth.
Take your time.
Why the rush? Why the big rush, everyone?
Yeah.
Hey, let's get it right. The Australian government will own these assets but form partnerships with experienced nuclear companies to build and operate them, Dutton said. Opposition's pledge to develop an Australian nuclear industry is an alternative to Labor's renewable transition, which includes building 28,000 kilometres of transmission wires from wind and solar farms. It would, of course, involve bringing more gas into the market between now and when these things are actually ready, and would also be prolonging coal. It's basically prolonging the use of fossil fuels in this country. The term keeping the lights on 24/7 was used a lot. It's cheaper energy, apparently. We need baseload power, and it's about securing the future, blah, 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 blah.
Yep. Gotcha.
I mean, is it worth saying anything about this without diving into all the shit that we don't know, which is what a lot of the reporting focused on? I mean, yes, there was a conversation around the reporting of this announcement of like, is this even an announcement? Can this be taken seriously, or is there any credibility lended to this at all? What do you reckon?
Yeah, that there's no detail for the plans, etc. Which I feel, I mean, to be fair, you're always going to be able to make that criticism because it's an initiative announcement. How much detail really do you want? Did you want like the kind of plans that a department would have to prepare over months and months, potentially years? Like, I mean, I think that's a little bit silly. I think it's interesting that they have chosen to identify the sites this time around because as I understand it, when they did this last time, when they were like, maybe we'll build nuclear, that then basically just gave a license to Labor to speculate that, there's going to be a nuclear power plant in your backyard. Could be anywhere.
Yes. Well, I mean, I do think that you would have to at least give some credit to the political move to counteract that argument, right? When you talk about nuclear, people say, well, I don't want that in my backyard. So to them say, well, we've identified these places that we want to, where these reactors would be built. Most of them are in our coalition-held seats, so we can wheel out all the MPs of those local areas saying that we support it. Whether they've consulted with the actual people who live in those seats is another question. But at least it is something of a, if the response to the idea of setting up nuclear in Australia, if the argument was, where are you going to put it? They are at least, I guess, providing an answer on that front. So that's something, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I'm curious to know, though, whether all of the local, like the LNP members will come out and say they support it, because this is not to be Queensland-centric, but like this is obviously an interesting question for Queensland because they're saying there's going to be 2 in Queensland and there's a Queensland state election coming up, and yet the LNP here, the leader of the LNP here, have said that they've ruled out, apparently, overturning Queensland's ban on nuclear.
Yes.
So, yeah, is the member for Callide, and I don't know who the member for, I don't know what the electorate is, where the Toronto station is, but the other site, are they going to come out and say they support it? Don't know.
Yes, all the federal coalition MPs have agreed to this. Yes,
Right, but not state. Yeah,
no,
interesting.
not state. That's just one of the many hurdles that would be presented.
So you're putting
in
your
order to
state
make
seats
this
at risk, potentially.
Yes, I guess.
I mean, arguably putting your federal seats at risk, but I'm sure we'll get into the popularity of this later, which is kind of interesting.
I mean, here's my slightly hot take. With all the caveats aside, as we'll get into why this all isn't going to happen and is bullshit and stuff. I guess I was just reading through it being a little bit like, well, this is a big vision being proposed from the opposition about a massive government intervention advocating for publicly owned energy, and it is a long-term plan of some kind. It is a really big change, and it is the kind of revival of the idea of government intervening into society to make things better for people. The kind of thing, remove Dutton, remove the climate vandalism inherent in it, yada, yada, yada. These are the kind of big government projects that people on the left want to put out there, right? Like these are the kind of big government ideas that we advocate for.
Is a massive military, a massive investment in new military technologies that would be publicly owned and, might be a big, bold plan. Is that the kind of thing we would support? Or in terms of government intervention, the kind of government intervention to support fossil fuels is not something we support. I think I get what you're saying. It's in terms of it's interesting in particular that they're proposing that these would be publicly owned. But I can't really draw parallels between this and a proposal for, say, a big build of publicly owned renewable energy, because it's not that is something that's designed to improve people's lives. And although this may be sold as something to improve people's lives, it's not. It wouldn't.
Yeah, I guess I just read some of the tenor of the criticism, the subtext being, the government can't do something as big as this. It should not be involved in a market like this. It should not spend this much money.
That's the right attack.
Even though this is the kind of radical, the scale. I'm purely talking about the scale here. The scale of the radical change and effort required is what we actually need to address the climate crisis and really the housing crisis and a bunch of other social issues. So I guess I don't want people to dismiss out of hand the idea that the federal government would spend tens of billions of dollars in massive infrastructure changes to address the problems that we have.
I mean, I haven't, interestingly, that's not the criticism I've seen. I think the criticism I've seen is more about the fact that it's nuclear and the fact that it is an excuse to prolong burning fossil fuels and also presented in direct opposition to renewable energy.
Right. Yeah,
an alternative to. Yeah.
We'll get into those criticisms in a moment. But just on the free market idea, I mean, hypocrisy abounds everywhere, constantly in our public debate, particularly on this issue. We've had people in the free market press and the conservative media saying, this is genius, this is fantastic. Of course, the government should own these assets, when the very same people have been campaigning for decades for privatization and against the idea of, say, a publicly owned energy company in Victoria. I thought this was interesting. Ines Willocks of the AI group said the proposition that the federal government own and operate the bulk of electricity generation in Australia raises some red flags. If it effectively renationalises electricity in Australia, there is a risk that private sector investment gets killed off.
Oh, no.
So an interesting little split there between the sort of perhaps, capitalist class and where Dutton sort of wants to take the coalition. But I mean, I don't know, should we be surprised by this hypocrisy that, hey, what do you know, when it suits a certain political project, then...
No, it's, to me,
the idea of public ownership.
It is their way of capitalizing on what, unfortunately, I think is a growing, kind of a swing of the pendulum back towards anti-renewable sentiment. And I think that's what they're getting at here.
All right, here's all the stuff that we don't know about this plan. Dutton did not answer questions about the costs of the policy, saying the proposal would be a fraction of the government's cost, but it will be a big bill, there's no question. A CSIRO report in May found it could cost as much as $17 billion and take more than 15 years to build a single nuclear power plant, with the first one operational after 2040. It concluded electricity from nuclear power could be at least 50% more expensive than solar and wind. So there's also just no modeling or evidence that they can cite that will tell you that nuclear power is actually going to be cheaper than renewables.
I don't know how they can argue that. It's ridiculous.
Amy Remikas in The Guardian put together a pretty decent list about what we don't know about this proposal. So far, we don't know how much it would cost. We don't know what reactors they would use. We don't know how they would purchase the privately owned coal stations. We don't know how they'd overcome state objections. We don't know where the waste would go. We don't know how they plan on building two of the reactors within the 2035-37 timeline. We don't know where the funding will come from. There's been no serious consultation with communities, and there's been no serious research undertaken with the sites. So when they talk about what kind of reactors we're using, that's like, even in their announcement, the coalition's like, we haven't even decided whether we'd use small modular reactors or large scale ones. Small modular reactors are actually more expensive than larger ones, by the way.
Okay. What's the difference between them?
Well, I think like literally the size between them. There's no commercially active small modular reactors anywhere in the world. There are only two that exist in China and Russia. They took decades to construct, and there's just no market for them whatsoever. And they're more expensive than the conventional nuclear reactors, I suppose.
Yeah.
They just sort of don't exist. It really is kind of a fantasy.
Yeah, okay. So when you say small, like, is that the kind of thing, when there are these people who are like, oh, you're an environmentalist, you should love nuclear, the footprint is way smaller than these enormous renewables projects, particularly wind, for example, that would require clearing all of this forest, or to build transmission lines for solar and wind. Like, on the other hand, you could have nuclear, which is really small footprint. Are they talking about small modular reactors, or does that apply to both?
Well, I mean, I don't know if did you see the fancy little design that Dutton was holding up?
Yeah,
like,
but
this is what a small modular reactor, which looks like it was designed in the utopian future.
I know.
Which
Yeah.
works out perfectly.
The
Is that
Sims.
meme of like the future in 2040, or the Simpsons meme of like
The
this is what
Simpsons
the world
meme.
looks like without lawyers?
Yeah.
So I guess that was the kind of design that they were looking for. I guess they're small in relation to the large scale nuclear reactors that we're talking about. I to be honest, I don't fully understand why small modular reactors are more expensive than the large scale ones. Regardless, neither of them. It's crazy to
Maybe
not
it's
sort of
safer.
decide which one you're going for, and it sounds like the SMRs are just not viable at all.
Well, the other question that I have around this, because I think it is worth, interrogating the substantive arguments, because there are people, I think, including people who might be green supporters otherwise, who want nuclear because they think that it's a more like efficient use of land or more sustainable or whatever. Why don't nuclear reactors need more transmission lines? Are they just saying because they're building them at existing sites only? They're not building them in new sites. Answer my own question.
Fantastic. Great.
Yeah.
I'll chuff off, actually, if you just want to.
Yeah, okay. But are they saying that this would, like, then just building these 7 reactors would produce an equivalent amount of electricity to all of the renewables projects that would be required, like, to build the same amount? Because, for example, in Queensland, I don't know about in other states, but the proposal is also to create renewable energy hubs on retired coal-fired power stations. But you also need to create, new solar and wind projects across the state, and, pumped hydrogen storage, for example, like new renewables things. So I don't know, is the argument that you need fewer nuclear sites to produce the same amount of energy?
Yes. The baseload power involved in the small nuclear, in the nuclear reactors, yes. I mean, and because they're already in existing sites that have that kind of transmission, presumably, you'd still have renewable projects. The coalition still, envisions having renewable energy as part of the mix for Australia moving forward. Although David Littleproud, leader of the Nationals, said that they were going to cap the level of investment in those. Like apparently, there needs to be a ceiling on how much renewable energy we have.
Let the free market do its thing. Come on.
Yes, but I mean, that's another issue with some of these sites they're identifying. The Liddell Power Station, for example, work has already begun to turn that into a battery. So like worth $730 million or something. So to turn that into a nuclear site, I guess you would have to scrap all that. There are also issues with the amount of water that these sites have access to. The current owners of these sites don't want to sell to the
like
federal
the
government.
Queensland state government.
Either they're state owned or they're private companies who, have other plans or don't want to sell those particular sites. of course, the question of where the waste is going to go. Dutton said, you could probably keep the waste on site. But again, it's just not very clear. And the question of insurance as well. Who the fuck's going to insure this stuff? A lot of insurance companies don't even insure people who live near nuclear sites for any damage to their personal property or their health because of nuclear. So
that's great.
Is the government going to be the insurer for these kind of things? All these questions that have not been answered. For the record, the plan is being criticised and opposed by the Climate Council, the Australian Conservation Foundation, the Clean Energy Council, the Clean Energy Investors Group, the Australian Energy Council. The plan completely undermines the findings of the CSIRO and AEMO report. The International Energy Agency has said Australia should not pursue nuclear energy and should instead focus on renewables. Again, Australia has got all the sun, all this wind. That's what we should be going for.
Yeah.
Both for time reasons, for economic reasons, for environmental reasons. It just makes sense. The Minerals Council is on board, you'll be pleased to know. They think this is a great idea. They'd love to get that uranium industry going.
Crucial endorsement secured.
Yes. Gina Reinhardt loves it. And the Business Council is up for lifting Australia's nuclear ban at the very least, I suppose. They say, the detail needs to be worked through, but generally we think, lifting nuclear is a really good idea. I mean, the question of how seriously any of this should be taken. What do you think? Media commentators, again, have sort of said journalists need to interrogate this. They can't take this seriously as a serious proposal from people. I mean, this guy's going for government. This is, in theory, the most likely party to take over government at the next
I think
election.
we should take it seriously.
They're at least taking it very seriously themselves. So I don't know. What should we think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a serious. Well, it's a threat to our our transition of our energy system if you're prioritizing this over renewables. But it is also a threat in that, nuclear power is risky. We don't know what is going to happen to the waste, and and it's a threat given that clearly the population, based on the polling, is taking it seriously. They think nuclear is a serious thing that we should pursue.
This is Nick Fyke writing in Crikey. These nuclear plants will never be built, and everyone knows it. The point of the exercise is for Dutton to present himself as a man with a strong plan, a visionary policy to talk about so he can avoid the fact that he has no climate policy, and in fact, not many policies at all. The other tragic aspect of this game is that Labor will see a policy platform even worse than its own pro-gas vandalism and present itself as the responsible option by comparison. Thankfully, the public has better climate choices. Wink, wink. What do you think about that? I mean, I guess it is... I do struggle to take it seriously because, of course, Dutton, even if he wins at the next election, he's not going to be fucking around in the late 2030s. I guess that if he won government, he would have to start doing something to roll out this plan within that next term.
Yeah,
to at least
they
make some
could
noises.
Reverse the ban.
Right, they could lift the ban. That is something they could do
And
at the
they're
federal.
building-
Although people have pointed out they would need to get that through the Senate.
Right.
And the coalition hasn't controlled the Senate for more than a decade, so that would be a big plan. You've got the federal ban. You've also got the state bans that you need to interrogate, and you have to have the business of actually buying all these sites first of all.
But on a politically, by putting this proposal forward, they then prompt things like the kind of polling that has been done recently to be publicised about how support is going for nuclear energy because people think that it's possible. People think that it's a viable reality for Australia. And obviously, even if the Labor Party is no, we'll never support it now, I wouldn't be surprised if they look at that polling and in 10 years' time, or, maybe even less, go, okay, yeah, actually, the public wants it. We're going to support it. So I think that that's how they do it, right? They float it and they float it and they build social consensus for it. And that's why I think you can't just, I think it's valid to be this plan is ridiculous, but it's also important to respond directly to the arguments for nuclear now.
Yeah, right. This is Adam Band's response on this sort of strategy. The battle lines for the next election are clear. Liberals are for nuclear, Labor is for more coal and gas, and the Greens are for clean renewables. Peter Dutton can talk about nuclear power as much as he wants, but it's not going to happen. If I wanted to tune into a fantasy, I'd watch The Lord of the Rings.
Sure. Okay.
Adam, let's update it, mate. All right, House of Dragon has just started. Let's come on. Let's get a little bit closer to where people are at. The Lord of the Rings. I mean, yes, Dutton Band's argument is Peter Dutton can't win government and he can't repeal the nuclear ban in the Senate. It's a dead cat strategy, a dangerous distraction from the Liberal and Labor's push to open up more new coal and gas. So that's interesting. So, of course, people are, yes, there are multiple arguments going on here. People are saying,
Yeah.
this is ridiculous, this isn't going to happen. Whereas you're saying that, perhaps you can engage with the idea of the
I
merits.
hope it's ridiculous,
Yeah.
but I'm not willing to just like ignore and avoid and hope that it's ridiculous and never happens.
Yeah.
When like I have seen like there's a not insignificant number of people who want an answer to why the Greens, for example, wouldn't just look into nuclear, who are
Right.
like, well, we need solutions, right?
Yes.
So why, like I don't necessarily think the framing and the messaging is wrong from Adam or from the Greens here, but I do think that perhaps it should also just include, by the way, this is why we don't support nuclear,
Right. I mean, yes, the question of whether or not it can happen, if that's the main argument that you want to go with, or that's the terrain in which you want to fight this policy proposal, I mean, you are kind of, I mean, that is sort of up for debate, I suppose, in a way. That is, you can make the argument, well, during an election campaign, you lay out your vision for the future. We say this is what we're going to do. We're going to try and fight and make it happen, as opposed to saying, no, even if you could make this happen, this wouldn't be a good idea because it's not cheaper and it's bad for the environment. And we have an alternative, which is way cheaper and better for the environment, i.e. renewables, right?
Yeah.
Do you think it's weird they announced these sites without any costings? I mean, surely they would know what would happen in that instance, which is everyone saying, how are you going to pay for it? Well, what's it going to cost? But I suppose, did the coalition have the benefit of saying, well, the major media organizations in this country are going to treat us with kid gloves and aren't going to go as hard as they would if Labor were to come
Honestly,
out with
yes.
some kind of proposal, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty wild.
They get to play on easy mode. It's
Yeah.
remarkable. I mean, yes, the
It
Murdoch
truly
media, the
is.
AFR just sort of reported
I know.
this sort of uncritically and said, there it is. And hey, yeah, we'll wait for the details. That'll be fine.
Yeah.
Labor's going hard. There was a meme from Julian Hill saying, if you don't know, vote no on the nuclear proposal. That is,
Really?
the costings hasn't come out here, which I guess is some people saying it's actually a very witty response and a callback to the no campaign. But I'm like, well, hang on.
But
It's first of all, we all agree that was terrible and actually an indictment on political discourse and actually a shit show. We all said how terrible and negative that was. So now we're just doing what they're doing. Fantastic. But also, vote no doesn't make sense. It's like
vote no to what?
vote no to the nuclear plan. No, vote for Labor. Like, you surely want them to vote
I
yes to
don't
the
know.
alternative, which, I mean, I know Labor has alternative. We have the Powering Australia plan. We've got this kind of connection lines, targets of 82% renewable energy by 2030 and the emissions reductions target. But I don't know, reading through all this, I was a little bit like, does Labor have a clear articulation of their alternative for the energy future? Or is it constantly them just fighting back attacks from the right? That is the coalition basically setting the terms of this debate and it's kind of laying the political terrain for it, it seems that way.
Yeah, I don't really know because I don't really know how many people. I couldn't have told you anything about federal Labor's renewable plans, to be honest. I know a lot about Queensland's. I kind of think, like I find it hard to step out of Queensland framing on this because it is such a significant question in Queensland and because there are these like very concrete proposals in Queensland that I think have made it easier for this like anti-renewables sentiment to grow, ironically. So I don't really know.
I mean, there was the objective reality that investment in renewable energy is slowing, right? There are these challenges around the transition. I think that's very true. I think Labor is responding to that as much as they can. And as we discussed last week, the coalition is certainly saying Labor can't get this thing done. They can't get the transition done. We're not going to reach these targets. So it's a fantasy to sign up to them. We've talked about how dishonest that is, I suppose.
Yeah.
But at least that's the sentiment that they're tying into. But I mean, I would just describe Labor's energy transition plans as quite confused as well. As we've discussed, their support for gas, the plan about we're going to have gas past 2050, it doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense. And
Natural gas, Tom.
Natural, it's very natural, which is great, which is natural for the environment.
Sounds good.
But I mean, it's pretty remarkable, right? We have an opposition announcing this massive investment policy and making themselves a big target on this particular issue, with all the holes that are embedded in that policy and how dishonest it is and how they're using that as a way to bat away concerns about the climate crisis and the government kind of playing defense, right? And yes,
Yeah.
what is the alternative vision that they're laying out there that's actually seriously addressing the climate crisis?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And like I've been wanting to get to you've put in here a little bit about this Lowy Institute poll from the start of June that shows a real like swing, a kind of turnaround and boost in support for nuclear energy. So what is this?
In 2011, you had a 60% opposition to the idea of a nuclear power plant. That's, of course, in the time of the Fukushima disaster as well. 62% said, no, thank you. Australia should not build nuclear power. In June of this year, Lowy Institute checked in again and found about 60% support for it. So basically a massive turnaround. The same number of people who are against are going.
I cannot believe the majority. Yeah, like that's wild to me. But what's really interesting is I hadn't seen this figure, that the gender breakdown is insane. 51% of men are in favour and only 19% of women. That's like, I don't know. There can't be many other issues that are as clearly split as that.
Yes, although I will, just for clarity, that gender breakdown is from the Redbridge poll, which I've also included here in the show notes. So this is a Redbridge poll, which actually shows only 35% support for nuclear, whereas solar still coming out way ahead, like 80% support for nuclear. Now, in that poll, we had that kind of gender breakdown. 51% of men in favour of nuclear as opposed to 19% of women. The strongest support for nuclear is found among coalition voters, 52%, the over 65s, 47%, people who own their houses outright, 42%, and people who describe themselves as under no housing stress at all, 52%.
Well, that's funny. But hang on, but that's interesting that you've said that. Is this from Redbridge or Lowy Institute?
That's all Redbridge, yeah.
Yeah, that they say strongest support is over 65s, because my understanding was that actually, I can't remember which poll it was that I was looking at now, but it showed an inverse relationship. Like younger people were more likely to support nuclear, which kind of makes more sense to me and actually kind of tracks with my experience, like that younger people maybe have less of a, understandably, less of like a visceral, ingrained opposition to anything nuclear.
Well, my brief research around the polling on this issue is it seems very confused and there does not seem to be a clear position. I mean, again, I also saw there was a Sky News report which was reporting a freshwater strategy poll, which they were selling as like amazing news for nuclear, which has showed the support for nuclear energy is climbed 5% to 37%, whereas the support of solar has just crashed by 3% pointage to reach 81% support for solar energy. They're just like, yes, new polling reveals growing support for nuclear energy. I mean, I get a beautiful example of how in the tank they are for whatever the coalition says and are clearly fully on board nuclear and are very happy to ignore the overwhelming majority support for renewable energy sources. But yes, it does seem to be all over the place.
Yeah.
Certainly the impact or the spectre of nuclear disasters from Chernobyl and Fukushima do not have the same resonance with people alive today. You kind of have to acknowledge the actually existing examples of countries like France and the US that have had nuclear power for a very long time without major incidents. And the threat of nuclear war that was also very present in front of people's minds during the Cold War. I mean, it's just, I'm not saying that people aren't concerned about nuclear war today, but it's just like proliferation has happened. Heaps of countries, including our allies, have nuclear weapons. It's there. We're signing up to AUKUS. You would clearly have to see that just the terrain and thoughts and feelings about what nuclear energy and the presence of nuclear means for Australia has certainly changed. So I wouldn't be surprised that I guess some people might be open to that possibility. Yeah. Having said that, I did come across the fact that US and Germany, which are both countries with nuclear energy, are targeting 80% renewable energy by 2030. So even countries with big nuclear presences are still recognizing the fact that renewable energy is way cheaper and way better alternative.
Well, not as an alternative. And that's the thing, like, yes, maybe if like 40 years ago we were like, okay, we're going to do this now, maybe that would have made sense and then we would be doing massive, getting ready to transition fully to renewables right now. But instead they're like, no, maybe renewables in 40 years and nuclear in 15. And
also just this spectre that renewable energy can't do the job, I think is just being cut away every day.
Yeah.
There was a Guardian fact check saying, can renewable energies fail to keep the lights on? And the Guardian said, no, the lights are currently on. That is all the impacts on blackouts and stuff coming from our energy grid have overwhelmingly come from the results of using fossil fuel powers.
Yeah.
And there was absolutely no definitive evidence to say that renewable energy capacity couldn't be built up and be as reliable through storage and through battery power that would effectively be, yes, just as good as baseload power from nuclear energy.
We are one, but we are many.
This is the last thing that you see in Josh Frydenberg's new Sky News documentary, Never Again, the fight against anti-Semitism. Just because I wanted you to be aware right off the bat that, the right's new arbiters of anti-racism are, they've got a real tearjerker on their hands here.
I am, you are, we are Australians, and really, full stop, that's it.
Anyway, I thought this little clip should tell you all you need to know about the people who made this doco, and that it needs to be responded to in the video format that it was made in. No, I don't consider Friendly Geordie's response to be a proper response to it. I don't. In that video, he says, and I quote,
I haven't watched it because this wasn't out at the time of filming this, unfortunately.
Oh, okay, mate. Well, don't let not seeing something stop you from reviewing it. Unfortunately for him, some of the most egregious shit that happens in this documentary involves our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, which completely disqualifies Friendly Geordies from talking about it. Not that I'm here to criticise unfailing loyalty as a character trait. It is a very nice quality to have in a pet. Anyway, all I'm trying to say...
Ready to get back into condemnation discourse? Condemnation and anti-Semitism discourse?
I condemn bad things. If there are any bad things out there, I'm against them.
Have you released a public statement condemning them, though?
Sorry. I knew there was something I had to do.
Wow. Very noticeable. Very interesting. Look, okay, there's much discourse to discuss, so let's get into it. The early hours of Wednesday this week, activists targeted Labor MP Josh Burns's Macnamara electorate office. They brought hammers and spray paint, and they smashed some windows. They lit fires in telecommunications pits, and they spray painted the window with the slogan "Zionism equals fascism" and devil horns on Josh Burns's head. The fires that were lit apparently ended up reaching or potentially were endangering residential apartments that were above the electorate office. And following this, a bunch of, the condemnations flowed pretty quickly, I think, in that morning. I noticed actually, and this is what I'm keen to talk about, before Anthony Albanese had even denounced the incident, before it was about 10 a.m., Adam Bant, Greens leader, tweeted, quote, "I condemn the incident in St Kilda overnight. Violence has no place in our community, and vandalism and damage like this are completely unacceptable. My thoughts are with Josh Burns, his team, and the local community. They have the right to feel safe." And other Greens MPs like Ellen Sandell and Sonya Semmens also posted similar statements. Curious, Tom, what do you think was the do you think there was much discussion before releasing that statement, or do you think they were just like, let's do it, it seems logical?
Yes. Look, I have no idea. Obviously, this comes on the back of the larger conversation around the Greens' culpability, responsibility, connections to protests, pro-Palestinian protests, and encampments, blockades of Labor MPs' offices, and which we discussed at length on the show. And this very often extremely long bow that Labor MPs and Labor government wants to draw between the Greens speaking outside electorate offices peacefully or speaking at rallies peacefully, calling out Labor government's complicity in Israel's genocidal war on Gaza, and the incidents of vandalism. Violence is sort of in some instances is violence.
That's right.
Damaging private property is that actually violence, etc.
Yeah.
The word attack is getting a really good workout in response to these, which I think could also be called into question. So, so, the party, I think, has had to occasionally walk a fine line between distancing themselves from activity or incidents wheeled up by certain protesters that they don't necessarily agree with, and also standing firm in their condemnation of the government's actions and also people's right to protest and the reason and to explain the reasons why people are feeling so strongly about this, but also to not take responsibility for the actions that are committed by people who aren't connected in the party necessarily. Now, Josh Burns' electorate and his campaign is a particular flashpoint because Josh Burns is a very vocal supporter of Israel. He's gone to Israel on paid trips. He has regularly come out in support for, made apologies for the actions of the state of Israel. And obviously he is the member for Macnamara, which is an extremely winnable seat for the Greens. We're coming extremely close to taking that there. So that's where I guess where both the Labor Greens contest is particularly at its spiciest, and also with a large Jewish community in that seat, issues around Israel Palestine also come to the fore.
Yeah, true.
Sorry, that's all a very big range of background. Perhaps only to lay that context out as explained as to why Adam might feel like he needs to point to this. Also, these incidents were something of an escalation. I think that's probably fair to say, and were pretty widely reported. And so perhaps Adam felt like there was a need for him to, make it clear where he and the party stood on this particular incident.
Yeah. I mean, I would be curious to know how much contemplation there was before making this statement, right? Because I know if it were me, I would be unsure, and I wanted to get into, the decisions around what you make a public statement like this about. Because I can understand on a purely a practical level, if you are Adam's team, you are going to be getting pestered with calls from journalists all day until you give them something, and they will probably be asking you, do you condemn this? Until you put out a statement, right? But do you I guess you could have still just given media a statement without doing this public tweet, which then really, particularly on Twitter, I'm like, you are going to then come to the attention of all the people who are going to hate this for various reasons. So this is the interesting thing, right? Like no one is happy with Adam's tweet. If you look at this, in the replies, it's basically this even split between people going, "Oh, you condemn this? Like it's your fault. You probably did it. You created this situation. You encouraged this through your support for pro-Palestine activism." And then on the other side of things, it's about 50% of people saying, "Seriously, you're condemning this as violence? While Israel is out there bombing civilians in Gaza." I saw things like, there's this one account, very pro-Palestinian account, I think a musician, Mudrat, who tweeted, quote, "This was political suicide, lol," like quote tweeted Adam's statement. And even former Serious Danger guest Hero Badge was tweeting things like, quote, "All due respect to the media team, but simping for property isn't going to make the majors play nice, but it is going to make people question your commitment to Palestine." So I think there's two questions here, because there's a question of like, do we think the incident was bad? Do we think that it was violent as well is another question, as you kind of alluded to. And then there's like, should Adam have made this statement? And I think they're two separate questions, because to my mind, I think it does cross into an incident that like, I would probably oppose it when you're setting fire to an apartment of someone, like just random people. I think that's not good. That probably is violence. I don't think that smashing the window of an office that's empty when no one's there is violence. And I don't think that spray paint is violence. But yes, setting fire to residential buildings is. But
or running the risk thereof. I mean, the people who committed this act might not have been like, "Hey, let's set fire to residential doors," or whatever. That was not necessarily their intention or whatever.
Yeah.
But introducing fire into anywhere provides massive risk.
Yeah.
And it's not impossible to
it's
imagine
hard to target.
horrifically wrong.
Yes. Yeah. Kind of notoriously has a mind of its own.
Yes.
What were you going to say?
What I think is interesting is that Adam's statement does not mention anti-Semitism. This is perhaps another twist to this particular incident. Okay. So we've got horns on Josh Burns' painting, photo rather, which, according to his opinion piece, which he would later write about it, recalled anti-Semitic tropes. Okay, Adam is not in his statement, sort of referencing that, and I think this is again a very tricky element of the conversation. Okay, yes, there is a history of and anti-Semitic tropes surrounding calling Jewish people devils. Absolutely. Have I seen devil horns drawn on other politicians' posters who are not Jewish? Yes, I absolutely have. And the idea, the presentation that Josh Burns is not in any way a publicly outspoken defender of Israel, and that, you know, the suggestion that he is purely being targeted because of his Jewish identity, I think that is something that needs to be interrogated and challenged, because I don't think that's necessarily fair to say. And I think that's been a really infuriating recurring theme in all these conversations. You know, in that long piece from Chip LeGrand last week, we had, there's a real perverse irony that Peter Khalil's being targeted even when his ancestors fought for Palestinian people. I'm like, well, there's only perverse irony if you ignore the fact that he's in the government, a member for an electorate with a very high Muslim population. It's like they're completely erasing all that just for the sake of his own identity and personal history, and then being like, why is Peter Khalil being targeted over the issue of Israel-Palestine? Like, come on, guys.
After thinking about it a lot, this is kind of where I land, right? Like, I think that it's a real stretch to say that Adam making this statement is going to make me or anyone really call into question his support for Palestine. I don't think I agree with that. But I do think that the problem was that right off the bat, Burns and Labor's response to this was to immediately characterize it as an anti-Semitic attack, right? Like that, and then that became what they were fundamentally condemning, over and above even the quote unquote, you know, whether you agree it's violent or not, but the violent element of the incident, including setting fire to residential apartments. No, their focus was the anti-Semitism as they framed it. And so then we have to actually pass that seemingly insurmountable hurdle of whether an anti-Israel, pro-Palestine action is inherently anti-Semitic before we even get to whether the action is good or bad. And obviously, as we've seen time and again, the media is going to flatten that out, which makes it look like any condemnation that the Greens or anyone made of this was an acceptance that it was anti-Semitic. So I can understand then people being, you know, supporters of Palestine and supporters of the Greens being frustrated with this statement because they're looking at the discourse surrounding it and being like, are we seriously conflating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism? Again, like I even saw Alana Lenton, who's a Jewish, I don't know if she's a scholar, but she's a commentator on Twitter, was tweeting about this. And she made a really, like, a fantastic summary, I thought, of it in one tweet, which was, quote, he's an Australian, this is talking about Josh Burns, he's an Australian MP who supports Zionism. Being Jewish is neither here nor there. His office, a building, not his person, was graffitied because it is where he goes to work as an Australian MP who supports a genocidal regime. But then she also was quote tweeting Adam's tweet accusing him of conflating being Jewish with being a Zionist, which I'm like, he didn't at all, but clearly because that is the tenor of the debate, like that's the way that this is all framed, it all becomes about that, which is incredibly frustrating.
Yes, well, again, the frustrating is absolutely the word, and how tricky it gets. So again, I can acknowledge the history of drawing devil horns on a Jewish person has resonance with anti-Semitic tropes. Like that's a real thing, but it is also possible to imagine drawing that graffiti, you know, separate to his Jewish identity.
On someone that you think is evil because they are supporting evil policies and an evil regime. Like to me, that's what it means. Like I get,
Yes. And the same way that there is an anti-Semitic trope that, you know, Jewish people run the financial system and have all this money and are secretly controlling things. That is an anti-Semitic trope, but the Israeli lobby actually exists and actually does influence political parties. So that's often when, the very bad faith accusations of anti-Semitism could be wheeled out in reference to certain tropes. I would say in terms of like the double standard of like violence between what's happening in Gaza and the act that occurred, Josh Burns,
which is the common response, right? Like,
yes, I think you can only level the accusation of hypocrisy at Adam Band if he wasn't also regularly condemning violence in Israel, Gaza. I mean, I think one of his other tweets on the next day, it was sort of reports overnight that at least 9 Palestinians were killed and 30 injured in an Israeli military strike that hit citizens waiting for aid at the Kerem-Shalom border crossing. I mean, again, like Adam Band and the Greens have consistently condemned this violence. I don't think that's up for debate necessarily.
Yeah, I think I think that's a very fair criticism to make of Labor MPs, for example, because obviously a lot of Labor MPs were out condemning this, and they refused to condemn Israel's war crimes and attacks on Gaza and their occupation of Palestine. But this is where I still, from my perspective, and we've had a kind of similar conversation when we talk about, did the Greens tweet Vale so-and-so when someone dies? Like, how do you choose who you make the statements for? Back when we were discussing Larissa Waters tweeting Vale Jim Mullen, the war criminal. But I just think, like, the problem with making these public condemnation statements proactively is it's literally impossible to publicly condemn every incident in particular, like every bad thing that happens.
Yes.
So there's an implicit kind of I don't know, there's meaning in what you choose to highlight or prioritize, and you really open yourself up to criticism there. Like, I feel as though, sure, maybe it would have made it easier for Labor or whoever to say, see, the Greens, like, they're encouraging this escalating violence. But, like, I just think making a proactive statement like this is not really necessary in the same way that we might make a proactive statement of condemnation for an ongoing or a broad, a massive thing, which we do usually do. Like, this is kind of out of the ordinary for the Greens. It's not like every time someone, an office is vandalized or some kind of small incident happens, we come out and say, I condemn this. It just, I much prefer it when the Greens are restricting their condemnations to things like, yes, we condemn war crimes, or we condemn racism, or we condemn, anti-Semitism, all of which we've done. I just don't think that they needed to make this statement.
Well, I think it became particularly clear when, if you don't mind skipping ahead to this other attack. It was not an attack. Some graffiti was sprayed on the walls of the Victorian
being put in the same basket.
Trades Hall, right? Which said "Cops out of Trades Hall." This is basically an overnight vandalism of Victorian Trades Hall Centre, saying, cops out of trades. That is the cops union is
Just quickly though, yes, because the news.com.au headline is, quote, Carlton Trades Hall defaced with vile anti-cop graffiti as vandals lash. And they use the word vile multiple times, but they're like, wait, so there's no swear, I don't think there's swear words or anything. What they mean is that because it's anti-cop graffiti, that makes it vile. But
it
anyway,
is vile.
Go on.
Yeah, it's really not vile at all. They were quite restrained, to be honest. This is graffiti on the Victorian Trades Hall wall that said "Cops out, cops protect genocide." Basically, pointing the fact that the cops union
Free Palestine, class traders,
Free Palestine, right? So these are out there. This received widespread condemnation from Luke Hilakari, who's the Trades Hall secretary, Jacinta Allen, the Labor premier, and of course our good friend Van Badham, a friend of the show. And I think you could see in certainly Van's somewhat unhinged attacks saying no condemnation of the attack on Vic Union's Trade Hall by any of the Vic Greens MPs on here then. Noted, and basically, losing their mind and sort of saying this is evidence of their classist scab behavior of the party. And I guess it's a good example of the condemnation game being played. Okay,
I know.
So of course
you
can't
win,
attack them for condemning the Josh Burns attack, all right? Because we've done that, all right. So now just whip out any condemnation. This party hasn't condemned this act in the way that I wish them to do. Therefore, I will use it for my own political ends as an attack against the party.
Yeah. Look, I'm not saying that it would be easy. I'm glad that I don't have to work in Adam's team and figure out how to respond to these things, because I don't think that it's easy. But it's true. It's like you can't win. Like you can't put out one condemnation statement and make it all stop. That it's just not going to work. I thought it might be worth, just like going through. We've kind of touched a little bit on Josh Burns's response, but I wanted to just quickly run through his response and his op-ed in particular. Because I think it brings into focus the problems with his response, and particularly that conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Because I think he's got two really big arguments here. The first is this was an anti-Semitic targeting of him as a Jewish MP, and therefore will increase fear among Jewish people, make them feel less safe, and that this doesn't solve anything because we are far away from and have no influence over what is happening in Gaza.
Yes.
that first issue of anti-Semitism, yes, he's talking about the horns on the picture of his face. He says, quote, "It made news, it got headlines. Aside from trying to intimidate me, a Jewish MP, I'm sure that's exactly what they wanted." And so he's saying there that the two objectives were to get headlines and intimidate a Jewish MP. And as you say, like, Josh Burns is not just a Jewish MP. He is one of the most vocal supporters of Israel in Parliament. He has visited Israel on like one of those sponsored propaganda junkets and has rejected calls for ceasefire initially. He condemned, actually, ceasefire calls. Again, previous guest on the show, Tom Students, he quote tweeted Josh Burns's response where he said, "The way forward cannot be through violence in Australia." And he said, "That's right, Josh. The way forward is through violence in Gaza." And, included this headline where Josh Burns condemned ceasefire calls. So it's just, to completely ignore that you are one of the most vocal supporters of Israel, and that might be why someone spray painted Zionism equals fascism on your window is so disingenuous, right?
Yes. And also, I'm sorry, but citing his own identity as a Jewish person as relevant to his contribution to this debate, right? Let's just be honest here. People within the Jewish community, get involved in this debate. Obviously, feel very strongly for it for a range of very obvious reasons. But I think that anybody of any identity has a right to comment on foreign affairs and Australia's role in this massive war that's being involved. But let's not pretend that Josh Burns does not, and believe even in this opinion piece, sort of saying, as a Jewish person, I want to see peace between Israel and Palestinians. So he's citing his own identity there. Now, that is not justifying targeting him or being anti-Semitic towards any Jewish person just for expressing their opinions on Israel. But ignoring the messiness of how someone's own identity and the relevance of this debate is there, and trying to cite that identity when it suits you, and then weaponizing it in response. That's the disingenuous bit.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it also, like, the conflation, it really has similar tenor to me to the whole Jerry Seinfeld thing, right? Like, Seinfeld is in Australia doing his little comedy tours, and he got heckled at his Sydney show by people yelling out, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." And his response is, quote, "We have a genius, ladies and gentlemen. He solved the Middle East. It's the Jewish comedians. That's who we have to get." And he said, "Tomorrow we'll read the paper, Middle East 100% solved thanks to man at Qantas Arena stopping Jew comedian." He continually was like, "See, you're just targeting me because I'm a Jewish comedian." And it's like, sir, in 2018, you and your wife visited this, like, training camp thing in Israel called Caliber 3, which is a camp in occupied West Bank where participants simulate attacks on quote-unquote terrorists, i.e. Palestinians. There's a photo of Jerry Seinfeld holding a machine gun as part of this process. His wife also apparently funded the counter-protests to the Palestine solidarity camps at UCLA. Clearly you're being targeted for your pro-Israel views. It's got nothing to do with the fact that you're Jewish. It's just it's so disingenuous. And I didn't realize until I was reading one of the articles about this that the federal government is drafting legislation to adopt that International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which the Greens policy, for the record, opposes, but which basically says that, yes, anti-Semitism includes targeting the state of Israel, so that you accept that anti-Israel or anti-Zionist activism or speech is anti-Semitism, which is just fucking bullshit.
And just to be clear, I think Seinfeld, it was even more explicit. At one point he said, "I like it when the Jew haters spice up the show."
Jew haters, right.
Now, again, every reporting of what the protests were saying at Jerry Seinfeld's event was entirely targeting his support for the state of Israel, his support for the political ideology of Zionism, and his complicity in his support for a state that is committing a genocidal war. Okay, so it did not have anything to do with his Jewish identity, but of course he gets to say, "You're a Jew hater," and gets these people kicked out.
And just like Josh Burns, his argument is, you're being anti-Semitic, you're targeting me because I'm Jewish, and you're an idiot because targeting me is going to do nothing because we're 20,000 miles away from the quote-unquote Middle East. We're 20,000 miles away from Gaza. Yep. And we have no influence over that. And sure, Jerry Seinfeld is a very rich and powerful man who obviously him and his family do have influence in that they fund pro-Israel things. But even more to the point, when you're looking at Josh Burns, he is a federal MP. Yes. Like, it is so insane. His op-ed says, quote, regardless, and most importantly, here is what the vandalism on my office did not do. It did not bring peace in the Middle East 1 inch closer. It did not return Israeli hostages. It did not help the suffering of the Palestinian people. It did not help anything at all. One cannot be for peace in the Middle East while acting violently here in Australia. He said in the media, as a Jewish person, I don't control nor condone what happens in the Middle East. As a member of parliament, I can't click my fingers and end this war. If I could do anything to stop this conflict from happening any longer, I would do it. But we can't do that in Australia. We just don't have that sort of leverage. My man, do you know what your job is? Like,
that's what people thought. They thought, come on, Josh, just click your fingers, please.
Just click your fingers. Well, maybe click your fingers as a member of the government that is providing material support for arms manufacturers that are supplying the IDF with the weapons that they are using to bomb civilians in Gaza. That's one thing that you could do. You could recognize the state of Palestine since you are a member of the government that votes on things like the UN. You could do that. You could pass a resolution in Parliament. These are all things that you could do, maybe not a click of the finger, but you could do them. Like, to pretend that you have absolutely zero power over what happens. Like, and it supports the argument that this is about him being Jewish, right? Because then he can say, yeah, well, I have absolutely no connection to this other than being Jewish. And so that's why you're targeting me. They prop each other up, these arguments, right?
Yeah, I've been seeing all this a lot. I mean, in the UK at the moment, I saw some Just Stop Oil protesters spray-painted Stonehenge and people losing their minds and stuff. And it's just, and people pointing out that Stonehenge has been a site of protest. People who spray-painted Ban the Bomb on it back in the 70s. It's all happened before. And all of these arguments against every single protest, it's just like, read a skerrick of history. Everyone hated Martin Luther King Jr., everyone hated anyone that was, calling for a boycott of apartheid South Africa. I don't know. I know we just have to learn this lesson again and again and again.
Yeah.
I know it's tough when you're in the middle of it, but I just think it's like you just have to remember that no one who is invested in the status quo, no one who has power at the moment that you're trying to call on to change this horrible stuff that's going on is going to celebrate, recognize, or pay tribute to people protesting. But I would argue they're on the right side of history. Don't set fire to stuff in case you endanger people's lives. That would be my particular tip.
My boyfriend's take was, look, what we should all take away from this is that residential apartments shouldn't be built above, electorate offices, which does make sense. Seems a bit strange, doesn't it?
I mean, it's almost like using civilians as human shields. Yes,
human shields. Some would say, wow, disgraceful. And the most galling, that's right. We talk about drawing comparisons between like the quote unquote violence of smashing a window and the violence of dropping bombs on civilians. And Josh Burns pretty much does this in his fucking opinion piece. Towards the end, he says, quote, yes, we must continue to call for an end to the war between Israelis and Palestinians. But today, most importantly, we must confront the problems we have influence over, the disintegration in political discourse, our civility towards each other, and the way we discuss hard issues. That's the most important thing, is civility right now, not ending a fucking genocide.
Incredible. And previously, you've got here, after waking up to 6 people smashing him office, it is clearer than ever that our problem is not on the other side of the world. It is here. Again, this idea that what's happening in the Middle East that's not the real problem that's going on here. That's not the real issue. The real issue is that people are angry here and are mean to me. But I'm like, it's all based in the conflict in your actions in regards to that, bro.
Yeah, and the blindness again of being like, wait, so the protest was ineffective, or these protesters are stupid, there's always this, the activists are just, they're doing themselves a disservice, but you're kind of acknowledging at the same time, but that this is one of the only ways to draw this issue into focus right here, because you're ignoring it and pretending that there's nothing that you can do because it's on the other side of the world. Like, what are people to do? He talks about how there's a difference between this and drawing chalk slogans. It's like, we tried the chalk. You didn't fucking do anything. What do you want people to do? And I don't want people to set fire to residential apartments, but honestly, I'm not surprised that they spray painted your office. I'm not surprised at all. Anyway, look, if there's something that you want to do a little bit better than joining a CEO Sleepout at the Qantas lounge for homelessness this week, if you missed signing up for the CEO Sleepout for Vinnies, you should join and support a renters union. Our call to action this week, we'll put a couple of links in the show notes. There's the National Renters and Housing Union that I think is particularly active in Victoria, but is a national body with branches across the country, as I understand it. There's also, particularly if you're in South East Queensland, Secure, the South East Queensland Union of Renters, and the Tenants Union of New South Wales has a list of like tenants organisations that aren't necessarily renters unions, but are sort of like tenants support organisations and advocacy orgs listed on their website. We'll put all of those links in the show notes.
Also give a shout out to Sonya Semmens. She is the Greens candidate for the seat of Macnamara. SonyaSemmens.com. That campaign has already launched. There's already heaps of stuff going on there. If you're in Melbourne, if you're in the Macnamara area, if you want to unseat dishonest politicians like Josh Burns and get in someone there who actually stands up for human rights and international law and good stuff, SonyaSemmens.com. Go to their website, see if you can help out and get involved, or maybe chip in some money to support her campaign to finally win Macnamara for the Greens.
Please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening now. Like we said at the top, particularly if you can't become a patron right now, or if you're a patron and you want to help us even more, that really helps the algorithm and helps us get into the ears of more people. You can also follow us on social media. We're at Serious Danger AU on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. We've got a bunch of links at seriousdangerpod.com. That's all our stuff. Tom needs to go back to bed. He's sick.
Bye, everyone.
Gross.
Serious Danger Australia.